So really, when we founded Algix, our mission was to transform the algae biomass from a nuisance material into a renewable feedstock that we can convert into a wide variety of different products. And so our company is focused on the thermoplastic conversion to turn the algae biomass into compounds that can be used with various polymers. We sell these to the factories to make products, consumer products in the footwear and sports space. And by us essentially, working with government agencies and private companies to produce this algae off of wastewater, off of power plants, textile mills, we have a network of our supply chain. We're able to take that material and valorize it. So by brands buying and purchasing and adopting the Bloom material, it allows us to go and create value for that algae and incentivize the capture of CO2, the capture of water pollution, and turning that pollution into a value through our process into consumer products.
Bonjour, and welcome to Mission First, the podcast to get inspired and to learn from successful entrepreneurs who are building a sustainable future for our planet and its people. I am Gilles Toussaint, your host and the founder of GT Impact, a growth and digital marketing agency working only with companies making a positive difference in this world. Growing a company that aims at having a sustainable impact is not easy. That's why I created Mission First. In each episode, I interview one entrepreneur who has a sustainable mission and who has recently gone through the difficult first years successfully. Together, we discuss their challenges and what they have learned on the way. We go into detail with a specific focus on company culture, leadership, financing, growth, and business strategy. That way, you'll learn hands-on tips on how to build a better future and a successful company too. Today, my guest is Ryan Hunt, co-founder of Algix and Bloom. With his companies, he sells durable resins to brands like Adidas, Reebok, Billabong, who make shoes with that green product. The eco-innovative product use algae that transform air and water pollution to a replacement for plastic consumer products. So far with their products, they've cleaned more than 600 million liters of water. Started in 2010 as a spinoff from the University of Georgia, the company has now more than 100 customers and employs more than 20 people. During these 10 years, Ryan went through a few difficult phases where they had to adapt their company products and manufacturing strategy. We are going to talk about these challenges, and Ryan also prepared a list of do's and don'ts on the topic of how to sell a B2B green product to a brand like Adidas, in particular, how to integrate into a supply chain in Asia. So if you want to learn about B2B eco-innovative product development, pivoting, supply chain strategy, this episode is for you. Ryan, thank you very much for being here today. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be part of the podcast.
I'm really excited about that episode too. So you are the founder of Algix and Bloom. What's the mission of your company or companies?
Well, so just to be clear, Algix is our company. Mm-hmm. Our brand is Bloom. So we have a series of products that are called Bloom resins. But really our journey started almost 14 years ago when I was in graduate school. And I discovered that algae produce over half of the oxygen. So half of our photosynthetic capacity of the planet is actually being conducted by microscopic organisms living in water all over the world. And that the carbon that was being sequestered and the biomass being produced, it is significantly more than all the forests on the planet combined. So, when algae is the primary producer of the planet, how is it that humans have yet to really tap into this primarily totally underutilized natural resource that is the foundation of the food web for the planet? So ironically, the fossil deposits, the oils that we extract, are actually ancient marine algae blooms that have undergone pressure and heat for millions of years. And so, we're actually leveraging our current industrial booms on ancient algae biomass resources. And, yet at the same time, we're actually today suffering major algae problems in terms of harmful algae blooms and drinking water issues and environmental and ecosystem health related problems with algae and pollution. And we have this major issue. How can we turn that problem into a beneficial solution that provides us a way to displace our use of non-renewable resources like petroleum and coal, et cetera? So really, when we founded Algix, our mission was to transform the algae biomass from a nuisance material into a renewable feedstock that we can convert into a wide variety of different products. And so our company is focused on the thermoplastic conversion to turn the algae biomass into compounds that can be used with various polymers. Some of those can be biodegradable. Some of them can be engineered and durable. But we essentially produce these algae bloom pellets that are about half algae by weight. We sell these to the factories to make products, consumer products in the footwear and sports space. And by us essentially, working with government agencies and private companies to produce this algae off of wastewater, off of power plants, textile mills, we have a network of our supply chain. We're able to take that material and valorize it. So we by brands buying and purchasing and adopting the bloom material, it allows us to go and create value for that algae and incentivize the capture of CO2. The capture of water pollution, and turning that pollution into a value through this through our process into consumer products.
Can you explain us a bit how these products kind of help to clean water and air? Like what is the process behind that, and how do you work with these factories to clean up the water?
So algae is the most photosynthetically efficient organism on Earth. And in fact, if you search algae blooms, what you'll find is that algae's exponential growth rate occurs when there's excess nutrients. It's an abundant resource that's all over the place, just no one's harvesting it. So our initial phase of the company was, okay, there's algae. We proved in the laboratory that we can convert the algae into a thermoplastic material. And that allows us to displace or replace the amount of petroleum-based plastics or even plant-based plastics in the finished product. So that once we figured out the process, it was really building the supply chain. Most of our company has been the actual effort has been building a supply chain to get enough algae from enough places that provide enough benefit that we can actually produce our product at the scale and cost structure that's needed to get commercial adoption.
And what's an example of factory, and how they use the algae in that case to produce the biomass that you need?
So we have two fundamental classes of vendors or suppliers that work with us. We have governments and we have private companies. On the government side, we work with municipalities and agencies to either use the algae in an engineered system that actually cleans and polishes wastewater from a town. So our current cities have wastewater treatment plants. They release a large quantity of ammonia, phosphorus, and CO2. So, we've been installing, and companies have been doing this, and there's interest in doing this more, have large treatment lagoons or raceway ponds that can grow algae and absorb those inorganic nutrients that are typically being discharged at low levels, but we're able to capture those and reassimilate it into biomass, into a feedstock that goes into the top of the food chain. So we can turn that biomass into crude oil, we can turn it into hydrogen, we can turn it into a wide range of different chemicals and products, but it all starts with the nutrients. So the whole mission of the company is to change the perspective of industry to see our lowest value emissions, the carbon dioxide, the ammonia, the phosphorus, as one of our most valuable assets, in the sense that we can actually use that material, and whether it's a company producing enough of it that it makes sense for them to install an algae system, or that our governments, our municipalities start using the people's wastewater, the city's wastewater, the industrial wastewater, the agricultural wastewater, which is such a huge problem, using that as a nutrient source to produce algae in the most photosynthetic way. So some of these are municipalities that are growing the algae on purpose to prevent the discharge of the pollution. We also have companies that are developing greenhouse-based systems that are bolting on and doing it even more efficiently. But then on the other side of the picture, we have really the reactive approach, where we are looking at environmental restoration. So ironically, when we first started our company, one of the first things we built was a fleet of mobile algae harvesters, because we didn't know where the algae was going to come from. We needed to be nimble, and we needed to be able to deploy algae harvesting platforms to get it when the getting's good. And so the idea was that we were going to work with catfish farmers and aquaculture industry to harvest the algae as a co-product of their fish production operations. But turns out that later on, we've had big engineering and government contractors come to us to rent that equipment and use it for harmful algae bloom mitigation. So they liked the fact that it was mobile, it was deployable, and it was designed for harvesting algae. We were one of the few people that offer this. And so we currently have programs with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and AECOM, where the mobile unit is really the first step of collecting the algae from a lake that has an abundance of it due to environmental issues. Our biggest supply of that is probably the largest eco-restoration project in the world. It's on Wuxi in Lake Tai in China. And that lake has about 70 million people that live on it. And there's just an enormous, almost year-round algae bloom across the entire lake. And so their solution in China has been same technology we use, algae harvesting using micro air bubbles. We float the algae out. We oxygenate the water. We return that clean, filtered, oxygenated water back to the ecosystem. And the algae is separated, concentrated, and dried. And then we purchase that at a premium to incentivize them to do it more, or to help incentivize. I mean, they're definitely being sponsored by the government. Just what we're buying isn't, funding the entire operation, but it helps build a business model where the government and private industry starts to get the ball rolling. It's like, okay, this pollution, this algae, somebody wants to buy this. Like, this is a product. And so the more value that we can get for the bloom algae and these niche applications with footwear brands and sports brands and niche and outdoor brands, we're really trying to build value in this story to help us promote the massive undertaking of installing this infrastructure around the world and really helping transform our linear economy, at least in the dimension of algae, into a circular system.
Okay, so that's you're basically, with that technology, it's possible to, let's take, for example, I used to work for a worldwide leader in the phosphate industry, like a company. They could basically take the water, the wastewater that have way too much like phosphates or like ammonia, and just use this technology to basically like manufacture algae, and you could basically like take these algae to start using them to make your like the products, the pellets you make, in order to process them to make foam that can be used in shoes.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah. So we're always looking for partnerships where, I mean, the best case scenario is you're taking the waste stream from a company that's using plastics. And in today's age, almost every company uses plastics somewhere in their supply chain if you're making stuff. So there's not really a shortage of customers. I would say the big challenge that we face is that the algae is not perfect. It's not like you can take 100% green goo and magically convert it into like the highest performing material possible. It doesn't work like that, unfortunately. You can turn the raw algae into a plastic. That was the first discovery that we made in 2009. But the performance of that plastic is not particularly good, and it's certainly not useful for foams or for rubbery plastic-like products that you'd think of. So our first step was getting it diluted into a form that anybody can use. So once we make those bloom pellets, now any injection molder on the planet, we have over 200 factories already in our system that are working with various different brands. The brands specify the product. The factories order it from us. We help the factories use it and formulate with it. It's pretty much the same as EVA, or whatever the base resin is, but there are a few tweaks. and we help support that project, and then it's up to them, and then we go back to the algae producers and say, hey, good news. Adidas is buying insoles. Hey, this might actually work.
Okay, so this is the R&D challenge for every of your new customers, basically.
Yeah, so I think in the early days with the foams, we started focusing on foams specifically because of various performance advantages and just technical advantages, material advantages that we were able to achieve the proper material properties.
Yes, because there are different types of form and of plastic that you could manufacture, but you decided to focus on foams.
When we started looking at foams, it was because the customers that use foams are big fashion, athletic, corporate companies that have environmental, social governance initiatives and sustainability initiatives, where they're looking for ways to adopt new technologies, new materials into their supply chain. Because when you look at the life cycle assessments of consumer products, 50 to 80% of the impact of a product is the manufacturing, the raw materials. So by adapting and adopting more sustainable products into their supply chains, they're able to take a big chunk out of their greenhouse gas emissions and their other, the water impacts and other environmental issues. So we try to align our product with the metrics that the companies are using to measure their progress in terms of ESG and sustainability.
Okay, and before we go into more details about the different phases that you went through, let's talk a bit about a few numbers. How big is your team right now? How many full-time employees?
We've got 20 people right now around the world.
Okay, and what kind of revenue, customers? I know you said you have more than 100 customers, I think. And what kind of revenue are we looking at, like ballpark or like in terms of digits?
Yeah, we're at seven figure. We're a couple $1 million of sales right now and growing. We've been doubling for the past 2 years. So there's a lot of 100 brands is nice because there's some big names, but in footwear, shoes are made out of foam. They don't weigh a lot. So, a customer, we've got a lot of 10,000 pairs, which is a lot of shoes, and it's a lot of value in terms of the number of shoes. I mean, a pair of shoes could be $150. But the amount of algae they need for those shoes, it's still relatively small from us. So, we're using the footwear as a gateway to really raise awareness about our mission, our brand, our product, and technology. And what that's done is, through the validation of Adidas, it's opened up so many doors. We're working with so many new brands now, and COVID was a major delay, as you can imagine. And then last year, we've been in a serious trade war with China. So we've had some headwinds into growth, for sure. But those seem to be opening up more, and I believe there's a lot of pent-up demand.
Okay, and in terms of financing, how did you bootstrap all of that? You told me you raised some money from friends and family at the time. Can you introduce a little bit to the different financing stages that you get with the company?
Well, it's been really interesting. I mean, we've been really fortunate. We've got an incredible group of investors that have invested, many of them very early on in the company's history, and they've stuck with us, continuing to invest. So we have a lot of smallish investors. I would say the early phase were friends and family. That got us going for the first few years. That was a few $1 million, which was good. Some of these were higher net worth individuals, and then we brought on some angel investment that really believed in our mission, and we did some debt financing. We also secured 2 SBA loans from the Small Business Administration from the U.S. federal government. And so those were specifically for economically depressed areas, investments in these areas. And there was major benefits and perks for sustainable technologies. So we were a green technology going into an economically depressed area. And so that's, and also we're integrating with the resources of the region. So the reason that we are located in Meridian, Mississippi, is that we are surrounded by about 100,000 acres of active algae farms. And so it's the most abundant place for algae in the country, and it's growing every day, and no one's harvesting it. It's just out there, and the growth rates are high because these ponds are being actively cultivated with fish. And so that was the reason we originally came. Since then, we've had other suppliers and a lot of these cool lake restoration projects come online, which tells a great story. It's a great mission. It's a great purpose of the product and the technology, using the valorization model to help fund and grow lake restoration, environmental restoration. So to date, it's been over $60 million over 10 years. And we're finally at that, that revenue point. Our revenue's been growing, and we're at that break-even point now. So we're really excited. It's taken a long time. So patience, perseverance, and being flexible are all incredibly important entrepreneurial traits, I believe.
Ryan started this company in 2010 and initially tried to commercialize this technology of harvesting and converting algae into a biomass. So I asked him what were some of the hardest challenges that he faced in that early phase, especially on the topic of flexibility as an entrepreneur.
So I would say that at the time, most of the companies were looking at cultivating their own algae. So we had worked with them. These were the biofuel companies. So this is like 2010. So there was enormous over $1 billion was invested in algae biofuels back then. And so it was a little bit very different than today. And so we were working with them originally, trying to get their waste product, because we don't use the oil. We use the protein and the minerals. They use the oil. So it was a perfect marriage with working with the biofuel companies. But since I did so much research in this area in grad school, and for biofuels, that was the original goal, and ultimately failed. I knew that there was so many challenges to overcome in terms of relying on the biofuel industry, algae biofuel industry, to be abundant, such that we would have offtake agreements in biomass. So none of those companies that we were really talking to are still around, and they never really were able to deliver us much material in terms of sampling. So when we realized that we could make the product, we've been making these compounds for 10 years. Honestly, not that much has changed since 10 years ago to today, other than people know about it, and we have the factory to do it, and we're starting to get adoption. It's been this process. So the actual core technology, we knew it was scalable 10 years ago, pretty much out of the gate. Because our very first experiment we did as a startup company was, let's go to the factories and to a polymer compounding factory and run it at some level of scale, and then at that point it's modular and scalable. So once we did that, we started focusing our interests on how do we get the algae, and that became a much bigger issue. So when we started looking, honestly, like one day, my business partner, technology partner, Ashton, and I were looking at algae sources, and we started looking on Google Earth. We'd heard about some fish ponds out in Alabama and Mississippi. So we started zooming in the areas, and we struck gold. We found these massive facilities that were just bright green, chock full of algae, and hundreds of thousands, 100,000 acres of it between these two states. So we kind of said, well, that's like one state away. It's a 4-hour drive. Let's get over there and check it out and see if we can meet these people and see if we can, harvest some of this algae. And so the first step of the business was really to say, can we actually show up at a lake and harvest enough algae that makes economic sense? Like, what's the actual cost of producing algae? So we essentially kind of made a startup within our startup, which wasn't wise. We spent a lot of money. It was probably $6 or $7 million just on this first phase to prove out, could we actually do this from a production perspective, and what are the costs going to be? So ironically, we didn't actually end up producing that much algae overall, but we were able to produce some algae at scale and scale up over multiple generations. So from 2011 to 2016, we were essentially operating our own internal supply chain, and it was very challenging because it took staff. It was really expensive, and it obviously was probably to some extent a huge waste of money because we're not actually doing that anymore. So that's the one problem. But I guess the silver lining is that the technology that we developed did two things for us. One, it proved to all of us that okay, the algae cost 50 cents per pound dry weight tops. You probably could produce it for about 20 cents per pound, but it's very, very dependent upon which technology you use and where you're at and what resources you have. So we evaluated multiple technologies, and we kind of figured out all right, I think this is a good way to do it. There may be a better way. There may be many good ways, but we had a good way to get to a cost competitive number. And if the EVA or the TPE or whatever the plastic is we're replacing is $1 or $2, and we're producing it at 50 cents, there's room. There's some margin in there. And so, obviously this requires massive scale though. So for us, the big challenge was major chicken and the egg scenario. We ultimately failed the catfish farmers because during that 6-year period that we were doing the development, we didn't have the confidence or the evidence to convince an Adidas to say, hey, there's a supply chain here. You guys are fishing. You're fishing some, filtering water. This isn't a supply chain that's going to service one of the biggest sportwear companies in the world. So, we weren't ready for that level of commitment yet, but yet we had to at the same time prove that it was possible, develop a process to do it, and then basically convince others to do it. We had to get the supply chain set up day one, and it was basically a huge failure. We lost millions of dollars, and only recently have we been starting to recap some of that because we pivoted and we took those mobile algae harvesters and started leasing them to the governments, the U.S. Army Corps and their projects with AECOM for demonstrating algae harvesting at some scale that you can, politicians and government agents can go to and look at and say, oh, okay, well, this is actually working. Let's fund a project for this. The media, so there's a lot of momentum that we're trying to build right now around this concept of cleaning these environmental problems up and converting this negative into a positive. So part of our marketing is really tied to the success and the activities of our partners that are out there at the lakes and at the wastewater utility plants, installing the equipment and actually operating and producing the algae, making the positive impact.
And when you lease these equipments, so you are basically making some revenue as well with that.
A little bit. We could sell them too. Yeah. Ironically, everybody prefers to not own things because then they got to maintain them and depreciate them. So right now we're just leasing them out. We have 10 of them. We've got 16 more shells that aren't built out, but could be built out if the demand increases. We're hoping that more people want to clean up their algae blooms, and we'll have, we'll at least be able to support the initial phases. Maybe our equipment may not be the ultimate long-term, big-scale algae harvesting system, but it can get you started. One of the systems cleans 250,000 gallons of water in one day. So it's a lot of water. And 90+% removal of algae, nitrogen, and phosphorus, and carbon, for wherever carbon is dissolved in the water.
But just to make sure I understand, the main reason you switched, you decided to go for this, to focus on the second step, which is producing the bioplastic from the biomass, was basically an economical reason and logistical reason for you as well.
Yeah, that's our core technology. We never really wanted to be in the algae production game. We wanted to always help the algae producers add value to their low-end waste product. So typically the algae is being produced for oils. Those oils have high value in a variety of markets. That's great. But there's always this 70, 80% leftover that represents the protein and the minerals and a little bit of the carbohydrates. That typically is not being used right now. And so we're able to... Yeah.
Sorry, were you already then working on the technology of the bioplastic already from scratch in 2010?
2009, yeah. We were working on it in 2009.
Okay, so you had both in parallel, but you just decided to focus at the beginning to see, okay, how can we reproduce basically all source or material?
Yeah, step one was prove out the thermoplastic technology was better than biofuels. And that seemed to work. When we proved that we could make the bioplastic at a scale that was modular and scalable, then we said, okay, now we just got to get the algae. And that's really was the hard part. And then it comes in phases, right? Us being able to make a compound doesn't mean we can make the perfect compound for every person. So you got to find the right person that wants to buy your compound for the right application that it works for the right price point. And so, that's that takes 10 years. But yes, fundamentally, we did enough of the R&D in the early stages to prove that we can make stuff. It wasn't until 2015 that we really started focusing on foams. which I think kind of goes to your second point, which you're asking in phase two. We made another a big folly, which is build it and they will come. So we built a multi-million-dollar. So our second factory. So the first one we talked about was the algae factory. It grows algae. It harvests algae from any natural algae source. It takes it in. We dewater it. We dry it. End of story. The second factory takes that powder from that location and other locations, because we were getting algae by that point from other places. We were then scaling up the micronization and the compounding. So now we're talking about $1 million pieces.
The pellets.
It's making the pellet production. So we're running like 2,000 pounds per hour. So it's it's big industrial equipment.
What was so you decide you start first you produce the first plant. Sorry, you make the first plant to manufacture the algae, to harvest them. You decide to lease that part. You focus on the thermoplastic, bioplastic factory. And at some point you decide to switch from, products for flower pots to the foam for the footwear industry. What was how do you switch and pivot to that side?
Yeah. So when we look at it from the material form, it was the next step of the supply chain. So, biomass was step one. We sourced the raw materials. We reclaim those. We're reclaiming the algae as a waste product. We're bringing it in. We're making a thermoplastic pellet. That's really puts us in what's called the tier 3 sector or silo within the manufacturing industry speak. Means that you're essentially 3 levels removed from the customer. So we're producing a raw material. Our pellets were being shipped to other factories. These factories were mostly in Asia. And these factories specialized in taking those pellets, melting them down, adding other ingredients like blowing agents and cross-linkers that help essentially cast and create these foams. Or it would injection mold them into a specific shape. So really that next step is called conversion. And so, part of our business was really the core part of our business is the pellets. But to get something out, we had to prove that you actually could make a viable commercial product with our pellets. And so we did 2 tracks for this. One was successful and one was less successful. The less successful one was actually the first one, where we took the pellets, we bought our own extruders, single screw extruders, so filament extruders, and we actually produced 3D printer filament out of our own pellets, wrapped them up on coils, packaged them with cute marketing stuff, and sold them on Amazon and in Micro Center and other business outlets for 3D printing applications.
Because 3D printing was booming in I remember 2015 was the trend was 3D printing. Yeah.
Everything was 3D printing. Well, turns out, guess what? It was not such. The hype
in terms
was not
of volumes, it's not. When it's mostly private, it's not huge, right?
It's not. It was small volumes, very fragmented, very specialized. But it's been good though, because it did 2 things. It got our material into the hands of the innovators, and it's been funny. This was 5 years ago. Over the past 5 years, random people will have used our film. I had a call just recently with a guy who's making these really cool autonomous drones out of our material, and I had no idea. And I had a call with him for a different reason, and it popped up. So, but the other thing that it was very good was that it taught us it gave us training wheels in terms of lean 6.6 manufacturing, which means essentially the Toyota model of super efficient, refined manufacturing techniques that are kind of cutting edge. So really working through in a systematic way. Efficient manufacturing. And so for us, it was a complete learning curve. We did the full thing. We started with raw material. We were making the pellets. We bought the extruders. We were making the filament. We bought the packaging products. We made the packages. We shipped them to our customers. We were doing sales. We were doing marketing. We were doing inventory management. It was probably silly, but that was what we were doing. And so, but through that, we learned a lot. And so when we started looking at that business, we had lots of SKUs. We had over 100 different colors and specifications and sizes. We had all these different products, and there was a lot to manage, And so when we looked at the foam business, it was a little bit more interesting because we could produce what's called a master batch. It's 1 pellet or maybe a couple grades of pellets, and then we were shipping it to a totally separate factory that would just sprinkle us in at a certain percentage based upon the project. So we weren't having to produce 100 different products. We were, the spool itself is a consumer product. It had a UPC code. It was registered with Amazon, so it was we were selling to people, to customers. So I think when we transitioned to the Bloom side, when Bloom started taking off as a brand, really around the foam and the use of the algae as an ingredient in footwear, that simplified our business model. But then we still had the same issue where now we had to get the factories to agree to use the material and actually succeed. And just because you want it to be done, just because even the brand wasn't to be done, doesn't mean the factory in Asia is going to just say, yeah, send me the stuff and I'll make it work. It was extremely resistant. We've had so many different problems, and it required a lot. And I think that's kind of one of the things we're going to talk about today is how do you do that? Because that was the hardest part. I mean, making the technology was easy. Getting the algae actually wasn't that hard. I mean, it's out there. It was just a matter of getting it. So those the hardest things were actually the easiest things. What should be easy was actually the hardest. And so the way that we kind of broke in to the industry was we started our own trading company in China. We actually started our own wholly owned foreign entity in China. We hired local Chinese professionals that were in the footwear industry. So they knew they had relationships with the factories. They knew the business. We hired chemical engineer and office support for logistics and procurement. So, we built a core team, and we really worked with the factories, kind of one by one to build that up. But we put ourselves in the middle. So we became the company taking the order from the brand. So we had a brand in the US like Red Wings. That was one of our early adopters, or Vivo Barefoot was an early adopter. They wanted to do it. They couldn't get their factory to agree to it, and they wouldn't buy it from us. So we had to go there and basically say, all right, we'll work it out with you, and we'll buy the parts. And so we kind of got in the middle, basically contracting with the companies to make the foam, get it spec'd in. I mean, just really a lot of hand-holding to get those initial projects going. And so we were actually selling insoles. It was the brand's insoles, but we were essentially the trading company subcontracting it with these factories and having the Bloom ingredient for sure added. Because sometimes, if you're not there watching it, you don't know if he's actually pouring it in. I mean, we can figure it out pretty easily. Right? We can still measure it, but at the time, we didn't have all that process in place to really know. So being there in the early days was absolutely critical. We spent a lot of time in China. And then, of course, Vietnam has been coming online, taking a lot of the business out of China in the footwear side. So we've also been standing up and have inventory in China and Vietnam as well, which requires similar types of meetings and hand-holding initially. So I think that once we got the tier 2 business model kind of running and we understood, we actually had our cost breakdowns. So we knew what it cost to make the foam and what the factories were charging. And we did that for about a year and a half. And we said, okay, this is really complicated. We're going to have to hire a lot more people. If every footwear brand's have to come through us, it's not going to work. It's too complicated. It's not scalable. We're not going to be able to produce the environmental impact that we want, because we may get the economic impact if it's possible, but it was definitely seen as a roadblock and a bottleneck, as well as just it was it was a challenge. It was a challenge to pull it off and grow that scalable. So once we kind of got enough brands doing it, including Adidas, Red Wings, Vivo Barefoot, after a year or two, we started backing back off and saying, okay, we're going to go back to just selling the pellets. We have relationships with these factories now. If you go to our factories, they'll quote you the product. They'll get you the stuff. They'll buy it from us. We'll track it. We'll trace it. We'll ensure that the right quantity is in your product. But you're not going to be buying the insoles from us. You're going to be buying and speccing it with the factories. So it took some of the pressure off from a manpower and management perspective, and all the liability issues and problems that may come with manufacturing of all these different factories. And it's just like, all right, we're just going to sell raw material, which there's pros and cons to. So now we're back to the pellet business model, which is good. It's simpler. It's more scalable. It's more efficient. But we're not as involved with the factories as much as we were. So but overall, I think it was the right move, and it was critical that we set up our business to be scalable more so than maybe it's more profitable per se, to try to capture more of the supply chain value.
So, like, I remember you told me that, it took 4 years to Adidas to just, take your, like, from the moment you started to talk about your products to the moment where they went public with your products. Why is that? What happens during 4 years?
Yeah, well, they claim that we were one of the fastest materials ever to be onboarded and commercialized. Normally, they said it could take 6 to 7. I don't know. That's just what they told us. But it's several fold. So when you first approach these companies, you're typically, these big companies, there's just there's so many different teams. There's so much regulatory issues. There's so much bureaucracy, et cetera. You've got to figure out how to penetrate the organization and how to get your material adopted. And when you're dealing with such a large organization that is very technical and has incredible, they're German, they've got process down, right? So it was systematic, but in some ways it was actually easier than Nike. Nike basically has the same situation, but we felt it was more difficult to navigate through that. And we reached out to Nike in 2013. It didn't go anywhere. Reached back out in 2015 and didn't really go anywhere. And so maybe it's on, it wasn't just, it was issues with the product and et cetera. It was a variety of reasons, but being able to, the reason it takes so long is that you have to start with convincing, finding a champion in the organization, usually getting in front of an innovation team to say, this is a concept, worth adopting. And when you go and tell somebody you're going to go put algae in their shoes, they just kind of look at you funny. So, people have put other biomass into plastics before, and you can do that. And there's pros and cons of doing that. But algae is this unique animal. But because what we're doing is so unique, and we have the level of kind of validation and in transparency around what we've built and what we do and how it works. And, we've been able to, sustain 4 years of conversations and work of collaboration to get to the point where you actually get a product to market. So once you get to innovation, then you're talking to sustainability. They're going to be vetting your LCA. If you don't have an LCA, you need to get one ASAP. Even if it's just, you need something, right? And so I would recommend certainly having as best of spend as much time and effort and money. It costs us a lot of money to get all this third party stuff done on our process and all the certifications. It's really expensive. So it's to some extent, it's not fair because we're a small little startup company who's trying to do something different. And the amount of due diligence that's required is not cheap. But if you can do that, improve it, that kind of gets you the blessing from sustainability. And then it's time to go talk to the product managers and the designers and the developers. So once you kind of get spec'd into the system, they will assign your material in their database. That's a huge step. Once you get to that point, it's all right, we're essentially an allowed material that a designer can find in their day-to-day operations in their system. And we're in a pull-down menu somewhere. And so now we've got to go. So then phase 2 of our job is to go contact the designers and the developers and try to raise awareness of what we're trying to do with Bloom and how their decision of what little material they click on has this dramatic impact on the planet. That's been the past 2 or 3 years, is getting into the companies, getting people excited about it, getting people to understand it. That's our biggest challenge. Market awareness and just typically understanding it of what actually we do, because it's not easy. It's kind of complicated. We always battle the percentage war. Everybody's trying to just only look at a percentage number as how much bio content or how much recycled content or how much algae content is in it. And
I have a question on that, percentage. At the end of the day, when the people throw away their shoes, how much of that? What happens to the your material and the other materials? Because the production of your materials definitely was positive for the environment in terms of, because you use some renewable materials, or I don't know how you said, you recovered some lakes to be able to produce that material. But at the end of the day, when people throw away their shoes, is that recycled or not?
Great question. So yes, that is the biggest problem and challenge that we have as a raw material provider, is that we're not really in charge of the end of life of the product. we can make compounds that are biodegradable. The whole 3D printed business was all biodegradable, compostable materials. But those particular materials are not useful in shoes. You can't make a foam out of it. So in order to get integrated into the supply chain, we had to work with what they were already working with. So we have a overall environmental benefit where we're sequestering and essentially using the shoes as a carbon and pollution sink. So it's essentially capturing all this pollution, locking it up into a product that, as of right now, is not being recycled by the industry. It's a multi-material product. It's been cross-linked in the foams. You can't just take this thing to a normal recycler and they're going to throw it in the machine and out pop plastic water bottles. Doesn't happen. Doesn't exist. However, as we've been getting more engaged in the footwear industry and we're starting to understand some of the limitations in sustainability and some of the problems that these brands are facing in terms of the end of life of their products, it's multi-material products are a big problem. So brands are looking at using all one material that could be ground up and recycled in a more conventional way. But there's some other innovative approaches as well where the shoes can be reground and separated out from fibers, from foams, from rubbers. And so there are one in Europe, and there's, I think, one that's in the works of being built here in the US that would be a circular footwear recycling system specifically designed for footwear. It has to be, and has all the mechanisms to pull metal out, to separate everything by density, and start to recover some of these shoe materials. So that is something that we're very interested in because we can take those raw materials that are coming back out of that factory. Not only can we incorporate those back into our Bloom compounds at the starting point again to displace the virgin materials that we use, because we do use some virgin EVAs in order to achieve the performance that's needed by the customer. So as we are developing new compounds, we can increase the quality of what we call the loop content, I think has been the industry term, increasing the loop content where it's not just recycled from plastic water bottles, but you're actually taking your product and putting it back into your product.
Yes, so it's basically on the design and the manufacturing of the shoes itself that there is a lot of progress to be made.
A lot of progress to be made for sure. Mm-hmm. And I think the biggest step forward that we're seeing is just measuring the impact. When you start, that's really what we're the main thing that we talk to the brands about is when you look at sustainability, we're trying to help them view it in a way that it's not just about an arbitrary percentage number. That doesn't actually tell you anything in terms of the impact of what's actually impacting the world. You need to look at the impacts. You need to look at the LCA data. And so, the big brands know this. It's very stringent. And so we plug into that system. And with our LCA data, it's all been peer reviewed.
Yes. I mean, at the end of the day, it's still the same thing. We need to decrease consumption of products in general as soon as until we have a completely circular economy. We can't keep on consuming products the way we do. That's something very, very clear right now. So now that you are talking about, actually I wanted to talk about growth because you were talking about LCA and I saw on your website, so LCA lifecycle analysis for the people who don't know about it. So that's basically calculating how much, it's the
inputs and outputs of all the emissions.
Exactly. So how much polluting your product is, the manufacturing of your product is. So on your website, I've seen, for example, you have a beautiful calculator which allows your potential clients to calculate how many liters of water or a cubic meter of air can be cleaned if they use your products, depending on how many units of shoes they want to manufacture, for example. Is that something you've done for the beauty of it or for your mission? Or does it also have you noticed that really helps you to find customers or to convince them of your, your environmental positive aspect?
For sure. I mean, the number one selling point for Bloom is the fact that we're literally out there cleaning water with algae in enormous quantities. It takes a lot of water to grow a little bit of algae. That's probably the biggest challenge in terms of algae technology in the algae industry is that the amount of water it takes to produce the algae, it's typically, that's where you have to then filter that, and it costs energy. So when you're looking at a biofuel approach, all that water was seen as a negative. And so one day we started thinking about it, and we're like, the fact that we have to clean this much water, that's a positive thing. Like, why aren't we talking about that more? And that's really the main thing that we're after, and a good way to communicate the benefit of how we're cleaning up these environmental issues. And furthermore, it's about how can we inspire and incentivize industries to do more of it at bigger scales. And so that's really where we're turning to our partners, our brand partners, to say, if you guys adopt us, even at 5%, at 10% algae, I mean, relatively small levels, we're talking, 10 cents of cost premium or 20 cents of cost premium per pair of shoes that may cost $80 or $100. I mean, these are relatively small percentage number increases. It's not like we're doubling the cost of the shoe. And, that would have an enormous impact on the planet by being able to, get us up to the next scale. And then as we're getting the next scale, there's more, we can reduce our costs. So it allows you to increase your algae content more. And it also allows us to go back to our vendors and say, hey, Adidas has signed on for, 2 more years of Bloom, and they want to do, however many millions of pairs they do, which is like almost 400 million pairs, I think, right? So, if a big customer could come up and actually commit to that level, it's going to provide an enormous boom to this industry by having commitment behind, yes, algae has value. If you grow algae and intercept pollution out of the environment and preventing it from getting to the environment, there is an economic incentive for you to do that. And there's marketing opportunities. How cool is it to be working with one of the coolest sports athletic fashion brands in the world? I mean, that's where fashion's kind of fun. Trying to sell this on flower pots, we're doing the exact same thing. Nobody cared. Making a sweet pair of Yeezys, like all of a sudden people are interested in the topic. And now we have the opportunity to explain our mission and to hopefully inspire people to think about sustainability, to buy products that are more sustainable, and look at algae as a abundant and totally untapped natural resource that we need to be using more of.
And can you, for example, when you talk about shoes that is being sold like 80 to 100 euro, do you have an idea of the range of the final price of the shoes, like manufacturing price? Not retail, but the wholesale price, you're saying?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, not always, maybe more so. Just in general, typically, shoes cost, a pair of sneakers is like $20. It might sell for 80, something. That's kind of because then, the brand makes it, there's retailers, everybody has to double their money. That's typically the retail equation that everybody uses.
And what's preventing them from incorporating more of your product in it? Is it, for example, we talk about EVA, that's what you can compare of in terms of performances, but is it because also in shoes, I guess you need to have maybe not millions, but hundreds of different products in order to have the performance you want to have in the shoe. And right now it's not possible to get all the different types of materials with different performances made from eco material.
Surprisingly, we've been successful in creating high performance running shoes. We haven't hit every spec, but 90% of the specs and for the brands that really push their factories, we've been able to get 30% algae content in high performance, low density running shoe in midsoles, which is really good. That's it's the highest that we've done in a foam, and to be able to meet the spec of a high performance running brand, I'm really excited. The flip flops, the casual shoes, those are all easy, and those typically those foams aren't as expensive. And so, but when I say that we're 10 cents more, 20 cents more, that's on probably really a $20 product, not a $100 product, because that's the retail price at market. If it's going through distribution and going through retail locations, maybe there's a bigger cost factor. But 10 cents will kill a project for sure. We've seen it happen over and over again. So even at what I would consider us being really cost competitive, sometimes we're not. And I think that it's I mean, yeah, margins are slim, but it's all about value. And so one of the reasons this past year or two, I've been out trying to be much more vocal about what we're doing and trying to be as clear as possible, because I think it is a little confusing. And so translating a clear message of the benefits of using Bloom and building value around our Bloom brand, I believe in the long run will be very helpful in terms of being able to win over those small price issues. But yeah, the price itself is the cost is definitely a major roadblock to getting adoption into these brands.
Okay, so to get back to the initial question, your calculator really is something that is being used in order to convince your potential customers.
What we can do that no one else can do is that we can actually provide brands with quantitative information of the amount of water that was cleaned with their product through a relatively simple change in their raw materials.
And is it an argument that has helped you to win some deals?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
because you said that the cost is so important for these brands that at the end of the day, sometimes that's what I hear in the fashion industry. Sometimes they say all they want is to have cheap materials. That's it. And if we don't manage to have green materials at these prices, it's very unlikely that we can incorporate more of it.
Yeah, no, for sure. We're definitely dealing with that. Within footwear, every brand now has sustainability initiatives. When we first started 3 years ago, there was a lot of interest, not a lot of action. The brands that were able to do it were direct-to-consumer brands, so we had a strong focus on those early on. And also, we'd recommend going to your marketing guys. Like we try when we go and pitch to companies, it requires the marketing. That's one of the main reasons that we're trying to do footwear in the first place is that it's a gateway that allows us to communicate these benefits at the mass adoption scale. So, have we been successful in doing that? Not super successful. I would say more recently, we've been more engaged with our brands on social media. So, every week we're posting new products that are coming out from our customers and trying to build that relationship with our customer brand, the marketing team, and trying to build our network as well. And so, B2C is tricky, but I think clear communication is critical. And so we're trying to do more and more opportunities of sharing our story, sharing our mission, helping other companies, startups, entrepreneurs, maybe in the footwear space, understand sustainability and really be a resource to the industry in terms of applying LCA, navigating the supply chain. And if anybody's listening, feel free to reach out if you have any issues or questions or quandaries. But yeah, so I think that's been one of the biggest, that's been very satisfying, actually, trying to share with other companies the at least a way that we found to do it. Maybe it's not the best way. There may be other better ways, but here's a way that seems to be working.
Yes, and if we can help each other, that's the whole purpose of this podcast. So it's a perfect way to jump to the next section, which is the do's and the don'ts that you have very kindly prepared, which were this time on the topic of how to sell a B2B green product to a brand like Adidas, and in particular how to integrate into a supply chain in Asia. So if I start with the do's you sent me, the first one was in order to get your material approved for use by innovation materials sustainability teams, find a champion in the product and or the marketing department to drive the evaluation. Can you explain to me a bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah. So it depends on the size of the organization. Sometimes the innovation, sustainability, and product person literally is the same guy. And then in other cases, that's literally totally different teams that may be in different parts of the world. So it just depends on the scale of the company. But fundamentally, you've got to have an interest and need at the brand to be open to looking at products that are outside the status quo, outside the box solutions. You then have to be able to prove to that team that your solution is able to provide quantifiable, justifiable advantages in terms of metrics or percentages or certifications, et cetera, to really be able to to get the specification or really get the buy-in from the brand to adopt you as a raw material or a service or technology or whatever your product or technology is. And then, and the way you do that obviously is with people. You've got to you got to find the right person. And I think that what we found has been, you always want to have awareness at the highest level people, and you don't want to, fart around with, the people in the lowest totem poles that don't make any decisions. You want to find the decision maker. But with that said, yes, you need to find the decision maker, but you also have to, in our case, we got to convince a lot of people that aren't typically necessarily the final decision makers.
You have to convince the influencers, as we say.
You got to convince all the influencers. So the influencers are going to be out there saying, oh, that algae, it's only got 10% algae in it. Who cares? Well, that 10% of algae might have cleaned, 50 liters of polluted lake water and helped restore an environmental habitat project. So, you can't just reduce something to a percentage and write it off. So being able to have somebody on the team that can tell the mission and the purpose and the value of your product as well as you can is absolutely paramount in order to get it to the next level. And then after that, it's kind of just relentless efforts of trying to get that specification. Then it's get with the designers, get with the product people, get your material spec'd in, make sure you can get the quotes back from the factories, get them some samples, all the typical sales routine stuff. But you really need to find the pain point of that organization. So we recommend, for us, since we're sustainable technology, if it's a publicly traded company, we'll go look at their website and find their public records in terms of their ESG. So the ESG reports are ESG, environmental social governance reports. So big publicly traded companies have to have ESG filings, and they're encouraged to. And so you can find a lot about a company's sustainability initiatives by reading one of these reports. Adidas has them, Nike has them, Wolverine has them. So, we go look at those reports and say, okay, their priority is on recycling water. Well, you know what? We're going to focus our value proposition to Wolverine on, our technology supports the recycling and reclamation of water and converting those nutrients back into raw materials for your supply chain. And we can quantify that. We can give you a specific number. We can show how much carbon we sequestered in the process, and we can validate it through our audited supply chain.
So let's take, for example, the example of Wolverine, or if you look at the ESG of a new company you want to approach, after like finding out how you should tackle or you should approach that company, what are the what's your strategy to approach different departments? How do you start?
Once you get in, it's typically, you ask for the meeting and try to get as many players. I like to encourage my host or whoever I'm talking with to invite marketing, invite your product people. If you've got a sustainability person, make sure that they are there. If you've got a supply chain person, a lot of our questions ultimately, once you understand what we do, it's not that complicated. Once they get it, it's like, okay, well then how do we do it? And then at that point, once they understand what it is, they understand how it works. They're confident in us being able to deliver it in terms of what we say we're doing. Then how do we get it integrated into their products? And so a lot of the time, most of our discussions are with the product developers, the sourcing people, and the factories that are ultimately making the product. But then always that follow up back with the marketing to make sure when this product does go to market, that you're able to communicate that value in a way that hopefully your product that has your material in it actually sells.
So the second do you sent me was focus on the metrics and be patient. Can you tell me a bit more about this?
So these big brands really can take a long period of time, many meetings, to evaluate new technologies. The sales cycle in the fashion industry can be well over a year, some cases multiple years, depending on the complexity of the product. The smaller brands tend to act faster, but even the smallest, or I should say, even the most nimble of brands, it's still going to be 6 months to a year. So I think that's a big one. And then the other one, I mentioned this kind of earlier, but it's just so important, particularly working, again, this is for the big brands, the level of due diligence that these companies are putting into sustainability is really, really high. I mean, when you look at where the industry is heading currently, sustainability is kind of the Wild West. In the U.S., the FTC has issued what's called the Green Guide. There are now official regulations on what you can say about the sustainability of a product. And just based on the U.S., saying something is quote unquote sustainable or quote unquote eco-friendly, by themselves, those statements are not allowed. Those are highly frowned upon. And if you were, you theoretically could get in trouble with the FTC if you said that. What you should say is something in terms of eco-conscious, or where eco-conscious due to recycled materials. So in that situation, you are providing an intent of doing something more environmentally friendly, not necessarily saying that it is the ultimate sustainable product. No product is 100% sustainable, at least not yet. So to say something is sustainable, that could be interpreted by someone who knows nothing about sustainability that your product has zero impact on the environment, and that obviously isn't true. So if you were to say sustainable or eco-friendly because it uses 30% recycled fiber, okay, that's better. So you need to quantify those statements. And so when you go to a big brand like that and you do start talking about your product, your technology, stay away from the ultimatums and the superlatives, like it's the best or the most sustainable, or those are all typically red flags. Just kind of in general, sales side. But you want to focus on what are the facts, what's the metrics, how does it work, what is it made of. What is the product safety? What product safety testing has been done? We've done extensive testing in terms of hypoallergenic testing on real humans. 200 people wore Bloom foam on their skin for over a month and had zero negative complications of that. We've also looked at RSL testing, extensive RSL testing, where we take the most rigorous restricted substance lists that are presented and followed by the entire industry, usually set by the big guys. We've been able to pass all the restricted substance lists. We also have safety data sheets with our product as required by OSHA, and we have technical data sheets that provide the more specific material property specifications of the product, and then we provide SOPs. So standard operating protocols. If somebody at like an Adidas is going to adopt this material, how are they going to adopt it, and what does their factory need to know in order to actually run this material in their molds or in their process? So that is really important.
Dear entrepreneurs, I make a 1 minute 20 seconds break for an important announcement. I get a lot of positive feedback about this podcast, and I'm really happy I started it. But I know there is one thing wrong about it. For you, entrepreneurs out there like me, your time is limited. You love to learn, but you don't always have the time to listen to the long episode of this podcast. So I decided to create a best-of series with a special format. 10 audio episodes between 3 to 10 minutes, shorter than a coffee break. There are only hands-on advice shared in this podcast about, for example, how many times you should iterate to create the right product before giving up, how to find and pitch investors, how to inspire and build a thriving team, how to win clients when you have an environmental mission, how to sell your first paid pilots to big corporates, or how to prepare and to get a TED Talk. In total, this is 12 hours, 50 minutes of interviews I have condensed in 10 audio episodes of less than 10 minutes. These best-of episodes are an exclusive bonus for the members of my newsletter, so if you want to receive them for free, go to my website, gtimpact.com, or find the link in the description of this episode, and sign up to receive the full series of best-of episodes to enjoy every time you have 10 minutes and you want to learn something about growing your business and having a greater positive impact on this planet. So I leave you here. Enjoy the rest of this episode. The third tool you sent me was factory relationships, especially in Asia, are key. So can you iterate a bit on that?
Yeah. So one of the first things that we were told was that we were taking their other vendors' cheese, which was the clever way of saying our friends, our other vendors, these are our friends. maybe family in some cases. It could be longtime business colleagues or business relationships that you're essentially coming in as a foreigner and saying, don't buy from him anymore, or don't buy as much from him anymore, and buy it from me instead. And by the way, my stuff costs 5 times more than his does. So that tends to be a bit of a problem. And so a couple ways that we've been able to combat that is to go to China and build relationships with these factories and go to dinner with the owners, literally. Our team in China meets with them on regular bases. They know the people, the boots on the ground. They go and they do factory visits multiple times per week, just depending on what's going on where. So when you're talking about factory relationships, you need to have boots on the ground. And if you don't have boots on the ground, it's sometimes challenging to know if your product's really being used, if it's being used at the right ratios, or if the other big issue, probably the most recent issue, it's the most recent, but one of the biggest issues that we have is being overquoted. So when we do a project, we might do an insole project. We've done, hundreds of them. Well, all of a sudden we're getting a customer that's getting a quote for like twice the normal price. Or maybe typically these are new factories, right? These are, they're getting a crazy quote from a new factory, and because they already have a factory, they don't want to use the brand doesn't want to pick a new factory. They've got to authorize that as a whole process to get a new factory on their system. They would prefer us to work with their factory, which is fine. We can do that. And there's a process for us to do that, but we can do it. But the challenge then is the first round of quotes typically are way high because they see our material as risk. And they are valuing the risk factor in the price. So if it's a relatively small project and this is a new material, we've never heard of algae, we've never used algae, it kind of looks different, it smells different, it may act a little bit different. That's going to require more development. It might take a little bit more time in some of the mixing steps to make sure the algae is fully dispersed. So, we know the problems, we know the issues that we have, the shortcomings. They're not showstoppers, but there's some roadblocks. So we are upfront about that, and we're upfront with the factory, we're upfront with the brand, and Go ahead. Yeah.
And so the price is when you're saying it's overpriced, it's because the manufacturer in that case, they don't do the tests with your product first and then evaluate the final price. They kind of make an estimate of what the price will be at the end based on your product.
No, not necessarily. Sometimes they'll usually make it. For foams, in the foam space, one of the complications that we have found is that the flexible foam market products they're all different. You can't just, we have some quote unquote standard grades of foam. We actually went out and developed 4 foams that seem to be kind of run of the mill. Like these would satisfy, this grade would satisfy these specs and this grade would satisfy these specs. So, we have those. We've actually bought larger quantities of them and brought them back to the U.S. to give to companies to do development with. And we know the price of those. That's a standard formula. But typically with a new brand going new factory, they're basically making a new formula and they've got to factor in the development and the MOQs and all that. So, and a lot of these brands want to start small. They don't want to just throw us across their entire supply chain. They want to do 10,000 pairs. Well, 10,000 pairs, they're only buying, 400 kilograms from us. They're not even buying, our MOQ's a pallet. Typically plastic companies sell container loads. They deal in container loads. We're tiny. We deal in a pallet. One pallet will sell you a pallet. These customers are buying bags. So, the bag cost, now we got to break down pallets and sell bags. And so, we're set to do that now, but it's a scale thing.
Yeah, okay, so that's a scale, the small scale that makes it more expensive.
And so a lot of our customers are getting quoted as if it's a 10,000 pair. That's all we're ever going to do. And they're adding up. Oh, well, we charge them this, and then there's this tariff, and we've had a huge negative impact in terms of the trade war between Asia or between China and the U.S. And that has imposed a 50%, about a total all in about a 54% combined tariff, tax, and duty rate. So our product that was already expensive kind of becomes astronomical. So that's been a big problem that we've had to work on and try to resolve, which hasn't been completely resolved yet. But
it's a political problem.
It's a political issue. Who knows? Maybe who knows now with the new president? We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
But No idea.
So the fourth do you send me was find a local distributor or create your own trading company for conducting sales of your materials to dozens, if not hundreds, of factory partners in Asia.
So we did the latter. We could have used an existing distributor potentially. They are out there. If you have a more conventional material, and even I guess we could maybe do it, but the amount of hand holding and the amount of onboarding and just like the technical aspects of the product, it's not like any distributor is going to want to sell it because they're going to have to go to the factory and be like, okay, well, now that you bought a bag or a pallet, these distributors are looking at selling container loads. So, so then it's like, well, you're not really going to be working with the polymer distributors because they're too big. So you got to find some like intermediary distributor. And so then you got to find one that's going to, service China brands in Dongguan and Fujian and Shanghai and Beijing and Vietnam. So, I mean, very quickly, it's like, well, that company doesn't exist, or if they do exist, or maybe it's multiple companies you've got to engage with. So, if you find the right partner, go for it. That's certainly, I would say, an easier way, but you are giving up more of the margin because now you're going to be providing wholesale pricing. So your margin's effectively going to be pushed down maybe by half. So that's definitely a challenge. So what we decided to do, which has upfront cost and operational cost, is build out our own team, place them in the heart of footwear country, which is Dongguan, China, for the world. 80-something% of the footwear in the entire planet are all made in Dongguan. About 8 to 12%. I forget where this at today, but Vietnam's been pulling a lot into Vietnam recently. They're the second biggest. And so by being able to integrate and create relationships and set up accounts with all these factories direct, we're at least able to cut out a distributor middleman. Like our price is already high. If we were trying to sell it through a distributor, it would be even worse than it already is. Now it would be distributors, our cost plus distributor cost plus tariffs plus duties plus the factory margin of the conversion factory, then the assembly, the profit margin of the assembly factory, all the logistics there of actually making the shoe. And then that's got to go back to the brand, and the brand's got to sell it to a retailer. So, I mean, there's just so many fingers and hands in the pie. Any one of those that you can get out of there or avoid as long as you can, I think is very beneficial. So, there's certainly growing pains in trying to operate a company around the world. You got to have good people. You got to have good oversight. You've got to have, good technical manager or business manager that knows how to do regulatory stuff in Asia and international business.
So the last do you sent me was, if your product is technical, be prepared to provide technical support and hand-holding for any material or process.
When you're trying to sell a technical product, really there is a strong need for you to be there, I think, to initially get it right and make sure that, especially with a different translation, like we were translating instructions from English to China and then getting feedback in Chinese back to English. So the whole process of getting the process right, not only is it just in general, we had to do it in the early days to understand and provide our basic SOP, but also, each project is a little bit different. So, when they're trying to meet a certain spec, there's typically going to be some back and forth with the factory, either in terms of the performance, the loading level, or the cost, or usually all of the above.
Yeah, so you need to be ready to help them in all the technical sides.
Yeah, one of our biggest challenges was odor. Algae has a big odor. That was one that it's a big odor. It smells when you heat it up. It smells like burnt, like cooking algae. You are cooking algae. So there is an odor. It will be an odor. We have so instead of saying deal with it, in our SOP we say you need to use well ventilated facilities. If you don't have a well ventilated facility, this could be a problem. It's a red flag. Dry the material, get rid of some of the moisture as much as possible. That'll help reduce the odor coming off the process. And then we actually offer them a additive that they can add at whatever level they're comfortable with. And typically they may start with it and then eventually they may wean themselves off. But then we have an odor neutralizer that can go in at 1 to 2% of the compound weight that actually inhibits the volatiles from leaving the compound. It essentially acts like an odor sponge, like Febreze for your plastic. And so it provides a little bit of a fragrance, and it kind of locks up the odor compounds and prevents them from coming out. And then at the end of the day, the finished product we never have issues with. The finished product, the odor dissipates relatively quickly. Within a week or so, it's gone. But during the processing, you can get a strong odor, especially if you overheat the material. So being able to make sure that the operator, who's he's running normal EVA all day, he might switch over to your project and run it the exact same way, and all of a sudden it smells different. And then next thing you know, Tommy is going home sick because he's sick. We get that kind of stuff. And so like typically, it works itself out, but those are the kind of the problems that we deal with quite often.
That kind of fragrance that you develop, that you sometimes give them. What was the reason for? Did you have such a bad experience at some point that you said, okay, now we need to find something to offer them as a solution?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's smelled since the beginning. There's always we've known it was that has been probably the biggest technological issue we had with the algae that we had to overcome, was creating an odor package very early on. So maybe kind of rewind back to the beginning of the discussion. We were able to make these compounds 10 years ago. More or less the same thing we're selling today. I mean, that wasn't that specifically was not that hard. Getting the odor down, getting the performance right, and getting a brand to take it seriously and to understand what the benefit of it was, and then actually selling that to their factory in China, that was the hard part.
Very good. Now, talking about the don'ts, the first one was be cautious to outsource your entire process or technology to contractor, meaning in that case, I guess your don't is don't outsource your entire process or technology to a contractor.
Yeah, I mean, basically, we had a lot of investors they love this, right? They want, I get it. They want the easy money. They just want to say, license the technology and cash the checks when they show up in your mailbox. And as attractive as that is, I think that ultimately that effort has a lot of major problems that could be totally, catastrophic, fatal to the business. And so we've balanced it. I would say that we have balanced, and as the time when we felt comfortable with a contractor, we did it. As an example, with our algae supply chain, for 5 years, we built our own algae factory. We operated our own algae factory. We were harvesting algae. Once we realized that we didn't really have to do that anymore, and we couldn't really afford to do it anymore, it's kind of both, we stopped doing it. And we found partners, contractors, to do that part of it, and we consulted and did it as good as they could do it as good as we could do, or even better. We weren't as focused on that. But really, our core technology is the thermoplastics. So that's really our core business. We never really wanted to be in algae harvesting per se. We wanted to be in where's the value being created. It's turning a reclaimed waste product into something that's usable and usable in a high value product. And so to take that super sensitive IP and process and years at that point of development and just say, hey, BASF, you guys run with this. They're not going to run with it. They don't know how to sell that. It's a huge pain in the butt. It's not interesting to them, right? At least not yet. On the other hand, if you say, hey, China, you guys make it, we'll tell you how to do it, and then you'll just be our toll partner. Well, then you start risking IP theft, or you start risking quality issues, and both of those could be completely highly detrimental and fatal to the business as well. So right now, we are contracting with the factories and basically selling them. So we only focus on our core business now, but we kind of had to dip our pinky toe in multiple levels of it. And then as soon as we could find an appropriate contractor, we did, but we've held on to our base technology, and we only make these compounds currently in Meridian, Mississippi. We don't make them anywhere else. We almost built a plant in China. We pulled back on that at the last minute, and it was a big problem. Another story, another day. But fundamentally, we want to control it because we have to ensure that our customers have a positive experience. If they can't deliver, it has agglomerations. Like if we get any imperfections in our pellets, it can cause an imperfection in the foam and cause massive defect rates. like we can't afford for that to happen because it looks really bad on us, and we're not going to get any more orders from that customer anymore or that factory anymore. And that's happened. We've dealt with that, and so we fixed it. So we have the tolerance and ability to like, oh crap, that's not good. Like we got to fix that problem. We'll fix it, and then it's like, okay, well we can keep going. So I think the level at which, if we were to talk about outsourcing our core technology, that is possible. We can do that. It's been part of the business plan the whole time. We want to license that out because we want other people to be doing this. We want everybody to be doing this, quite frankly. But we got to make sure that we don't, lose the horse before the cart, and get out there and make a presence in the marketplace. Get Adidas on board, and then all of a sudden we switch manufacturers and we ship it to some China factory that doesn't really care or know what they're doing. Have a bunch of bad product go into the Adidas supply chain, wreck a bunch of product, like huge problem. So basically be really careful if you're going to outsource your supply chain, and make sure that you're in control of those key quality control points.
I guess that also goes along with what you said on the second dance about be present for your early projects and work through any issues with your partners, and the words like spreads fast, and your reputation of success or failure for future partners.
The factories talk to each other. If you have a bad experience with one factory, it's not even the brand. You're going to get a buzz. You're going to get a branded in the community that, hey, your product is hard to deal with. It smells. It's expensive. It's the guys over there are assholes. Whatever it is, you got to be careful. You really got to be careful. So we want to be empathetic of the situation the factories are in. They have a business. They built this business. They do this thing. That's their main source of revenue for all their their family and their employees. And so we're coming in and saying, hey, do it differently. Well, what happens if it fails? Like, this is their livelihood that we're talking about. If their factory gets a bad reputation for this in one way, shape, or form, it's risky for them to take it on. So we have to be sympathetic to that and be able to build a relationship with them such that we don't let failure be an option for them. We want to deliver to the customer's needs in a way that is mutually beneficial to the factory and for the brand.
The last don't you said to me was like, be careful to take on too much responsibility or liability.
Yeah, that was like when we got into the tier 2 model, we had to prove ourselves in the industry by actually taking the orders from the brands, contracting our own their part with our ingredient, and then we were selling it to the factory, to the assembly factory. So we got deep into the supply chain and got very involved in project management. And we kind of had to do it at the time. I mean, it was a solution that resolved the problem we were facing. Maybe there was other ways to have done it, but that's what we did. And the problem with it, of course, is as you do get more embedded and go upstream in the supply chain. If we were to open our own sheet factory, or if we were to open our own injection shoe factory, as an example, we're not planning on doing that. But if we did, now we're opening ourselves up to, well, if we're selling a component to Adi and it's wrong or it's got a defect, now we got to go remake that part. So whereas our pellets, we don't really have a defect rate per se. I mean, there is a defect rate, but it's not like they're going to come back to us and say, hey, we need more algae resin because, there was a problem upstream somewhere. So we're a little bit more insulated to those type of quality issues. But again, those early days of working with the factories, they're responsible for quality. So, that's one of the big roadblocks that we're facing, is that they see that this is a new material. They may have higher scrap rates. They may have higher issues, more issues. Those are all costs. So, if we're going to do this, we're going to charge more to do this because of these uncertainties and unknowns.
Yes. So thank you very much for all these tips. We already spent quite a time talking about all the do's and the don'ts, and actually the good part is we are arriving to the final part of the interview with a few questions I always ask my guests. What's the first? The first question is, what's the best advice you've been given as an entrepreneur?
Wow, that's a tough one. the best advice that I've been given as an entrepreneur, there's no one thing per se, but I will say that there's one that maybe stands out, which is design for yourself. If you see a problem in the world and you see a solution for it, or if you were wishing a product did X or did Y or did Z, there's chances are there's other people that have had those same thoughts. And so when looking at your product or service, you really got to put yourself in the customer shoe and look at ways that your product or service would satisfy you if you were the customer. Like if we were the brand, and what would we be looking for if we were trying to improve the sustainability, and take that kind of customer mindset. And then also, maybe the other one you said this, you have one, but the other one would be, get your product out in front of a potential customer as soon as possible, and really focus on your message and get that message as short as possible. It needs to be less than 3 minutes. If somebody can't totally comprehend at least the basics of your business or service in 3 minutes, I don't know, maybe I failed today because we've been talking for 2 hours about it, but hopefully
it's pretty long, right? Like if you get someone for the first time talking about your product, you probably need to be able to do it in 1 minute.
Yeah, 3 minutes is long, right? So really within the first minute or two, they kind of have to get it. And this is a little bit beyond the elevator pitch. I mean, not even just you meet them in an elevator. I'm not saying that, but a little bit more depth. They really somebody needs to really understand your business in 3 minutes, to the level where they can piece the entire thing together. If you don't have a clear message, it's the difference between not sharing ideas and sharing ideas. And when you share ideas, that leads to collaboration and business opportunities, and hopefully products, and hopefully sales and revenue.
Especially when you have to convince so many people in the company, in the different departments.
Oh yeah. So the game of telephone is huge. You've got it. Your message has to be so simple that somebody who hears it can replicate it pretty much perfectly without you there, to a group of other people maybe weeks later. And so you really have to crystallize your business in the most fundamental sentences and concepts possible. And so, I mean, for us, it's all about, using algae to clean air and water and making consumer products more sustainable. And how we do that is, that's a whole other discussion, but that's really what we do. And we're using this massively untapped natural resource to do it.
There you go.
I've been practicing a little bit, so we'll see.
Which book would you recommend entrepreneurs like you to read?
Well, the 3 minute rule would be a good one. That's kind of what I'm referring to, which is how do you structure your entire business pitch, business concept into 3 minutes or less. That one is a great book. It came out relatively recently. Recommend that for any entrepreneur. The other one that's quite interesting, once you get past the product development phase and you actually have a product and you're talking about marketing, is a book called Alchemy, I believe by Roy Sutherland. It's the dark magic behind marketing. It's kind of a crazy title, but it is awesome. It is so interesting. It really talks about how humans they rationalize decisions with logic, but in reality, the actual decision-making process is a psychological process based on emotions. And so after those emotions happen, after that psychological process occurs, the brain retroactively tries to construct a logical reason why that's why you picked. But with all these studies they've looked at from the psychological science side, it turns out that your actual decisions are emotion based. Your actual decisions are emotion based, which isn't necessarily everybody kind of knows that to some extent. But I think we all lie to ourselves saying, "Oh no, I think things through, and I have an Excel chart, and I'm going to go analyze it and come out with no." You're going to make a decision based on a gut feeling, or you're going to rationalize a logical decision to match up with what you want to do subconsciously and psychologically. And so that book gives lots of great examples of ways that you can create value out of nothing, hence the name Alchemy, but using this principle to reframe and really around branding, around marketing, around the sales process, and really create win-win situations. The other one that's just, a must read would be the book. I'm on my second round of it now, called Never Split the Difference.
Oh, yeah.
And this is negotiating like your life depends on it.
Chris Voss.
So Chris Voss is the man, and it's an absolutely amazing book all about the art of negotiation and how really every decision with other people is essentially a negotiation in a way, and how tactical empathy and understanding the customer and a few other key elements and tactics can be deployed to really create a situation where both parties win. And understanding how to negotiate at the business table, at the dinner table, and even with your kids, it's been hugely impactful for me.
Yes, I mean it's one of my favorite books as well. But I found the 3-minute rule, and I found Alchemy too. So I will add the links to the resources, as well as Chris Voss' book, who's gonna be in I think also Lubomila and a few other guests mentioned it. So I know it's a good reference, and it's also something really nice to read, because all the almost every chapter starts with one story of his experience at the FBI negotiating some serious cases. So it's a fascinating book. We are arriving at the last question, which is, what would be one training, podcast, like blog or influencer you'd recommend to follow?
One that I've been following recently is Julian Guderly of Blue Planet, Green Planet, and Planet Positive, and the work that he's doing over there with helping raise awareness around the missions of over 500 global planetary stewardship change makers. So essentially finding the people in the world that are pushing the boundaries for a more regenerative planet. So these are technologies, these are artists, these are philosophers, these are business CEOs. They may be religious people. It's all over. It's a full gamut of different guests, but all focused around really identifying how best to turn the planet around in terms of our impact on the planet, and how to create a more regenerative economy through collaboration, regeneration, and really focusing on innovation as a core element of that.
Yes, I found it to be here. Green Planet, Blue Planet. But we'll share it as well. Thank you very much for that tip. Now it's your time to basically say anything you want to say and to share with our listeners. If you are hiring, if you are raising some funding, if anything, where people can find you or contact you if they are actually in the fashion industry and want to integrate some of your green product into their shoes. So that's your time.
All right, thank you. So yeah, we've been very fortunate. We just closed a funding round recently during COVID, a multi-million-dollar raise. So that was fantastic. We are on track for profitability over the next year to two, and we are actively looking for partners in the fashion, athletic, sports, and even automotive spaces. Anywhere where there is a need for sustainable materials that are foams or molded components. We typically work with what are called elastomers. That's kind of our focused market in terms of our business. So we're always looking for collaborators. Could be on the feedstock side. If you're an algae entrepreneur and you have a new innovative production system, would love to meet you and talk about how that system could be scaled up to produce and clean algae and clean water. Whereas we also like working with the thermoplastic companies in terms of creating new products, new markets. We're actually working on a new a line of camping gear and camping products for sale and hopefully some of the big box stores. And so if you have a product idea, or if you're at a brand that is making footwear or bags that have foam in them, or we're doing some grips for like ski poles. So like, the kind of the different types of products, materials, then, please reach out. My direct contact is ryan.hunt@algix.com. You can learn more about our company at our website, bloomfoam.com or bloomtreadwell.com. Both will redirect to the same place. And our social media accounts, we really are trying to grow our awareness in the B2C level. So we would really appreciate if you're listening to follow us on Instagram at bloomfoam. And I'm also on LinkedIn as Ryan W. Hunt, and I post quite frequently more on the technical side or business-related side, some of the cool developments that we're doing, some of the new projects, and also share information around algae education, inspiration, biotechnologies that are poised to help improve the planet in various different ways. So that would be a great place to reach out as well. And I love finding collaborations on LinkedIn. And then we also have videos. If you want to like visually see algae blooms like firsthand, you can go to my YouTube channel, The Hunt for Algae on YouTube. And there's lots of videos there. And then we're also crafting our own, we're working towards crafting our own series, a Bloom series. So right now you can see our first few episodes on YouTube at Bloomfoam, that one's Bloom Treadwell, I believe, on YouTube. And you can see our Bloom channel and see videos and interviews that we've done with myself and others on our team, talking about some of the various topics that we discussed today.
The Hunt for Algae, you said?
The Hunt for Algae. Yeah, that's my escapades in the algae world, basically.
Good. I'll share all these links with our listeners on the webpage of the episode. And Ryan, thank you so much for your time and all your tips today for the entrepreneurs out there. I wish you all the best with Algix and hopefully to reach your break-even point as soon as possible, but especially to keep on cleaning up the water and the air thanks to your technology and the biomass you're using.
All right. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity and look forward to the episode.
Thank you very much. Ciao, ciao.
If you like this podcast, there are two things you can do that would mean the world to me. The first thing is to sign up for the podcast newsletter. That way you will be notified of the new episodes, but you will also get a summary of the learnings at the end of every season. Plus, for each episode, you will get the resources and the list of do's and don'ts that every guest shares with me. And finally, you will also get the opportunity to ask our future guests one question in advance. You can sign up for this newsletter on gtimpact.com. The second thing you